Okay, this is another episode of Thorin and Loco versus Worlds. We're back with the old format where we used to do the one-on-one, the split screen action, which, by the way, to be fair, was a bit more spicy, right, Loco? Like the problem is we've been very cordial recently because we've become co-hosts now. You know, we're working together. We have a guest, so we want them to feel comfortable, trying to draw their knowledge out. Most of the other episodes were just two people who very strongly believed one thing that was totally incompatible with the other person's opinion, and then vaguely conceding some points while never agreeing with the other person's opinion, right?
Yeah, I mean, I went back and watched those videos, and I'm like, man, me and Thorin used to go at each other, and feels like we both grown up. Like,
I'm sure we could get a bit of it back in there at some point, right? Not least because this episode, this is what people might be interested in, is going to be an episode that the concept is, who was the best Western team to go to Worlds? So I hope already people understand. Loco tends to have a certain bias for North American teams. I generally think North American teams are somewhat overrated, although to be fair, I'm actually not as ridiculously the EU fanboy as people in EU usually are, because I've done actually articles that people have seen where, for example, I stood up for the TSM team in 2016 and said, like, you can't just write them off, you know, because they had one bad Worlds, etc. So anyway, this episode at the beginning, let me just say at the top, is sponsored by GG Esport, which is a website where you can go and you can find out the odds for all the different matches. For example, for the World Championship, they have stats for all the different teams. They have in-depth hard stats, like, you know, like how many CS per minute or whatever, how many what your KDA is. But they also have their own generated stats that you would, I guess, call a soft stat. That's like, you know, what's someone's carry potential. I can't remember what some of the other ones are, but you know, it's like along those lines. So
troll, feed, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So like more ones. Such if you were just looking at something, you weren't going to watch the games, you could get a sense of what the player's like. And you can also, on that site, make bets, but we're not talking about, like, put money on the game. It's like you bet tokens or something along these lines. And so check it out if you want to. You'll see some stats when we get to one of the last teams. So, as I said with the premise there, best Western team to go to Worlds, I was very careful in how I presented that sentence, because if we talk about the best team at Worlds, it's actually not that great a discussion, because no team from the West has won any of the, like, World Championships. You know, there was the season one, you know, no one really won, and so you would be discussing things like how hard was the person's group, or where did they, you know, how hard was this team that beat them, which is like, that's not really that sexy a discussion. So instead what we decided to do was, like I said, going to Worlds. So we're going to try and figure out which team on the way into the World Championship was the best. So the reason why that I think that's quite cool is, if you notice, I really love like hypothetical topics. So mainly because whatever happened did happen, so we all could see what happened in that sense. So in this sense, there will be some people on this list who you might think, well, they can't be on the list because they didn't do well at Worlds. But the point is, if they were really strong going into Worlds. So we've picked out 3 names, and we're going to lay them all out. And then once we've laid out the case for each of them, we'll do the sort of like argue over which one it should be, or maybe on all the different criteria, we'll compare them all, you know. So the 3 teams we picked out for this is going to be, I'll go in chronological order. We have a very obvious one that I hope everyone watching this has guessed already. It's Fnatic 2015, the one that when they were in Europe, they were 18-0, and then they won both the splits with a slightly different roster. Obviously, they did do fabulously at Worlds, finished top 4. Then we, after that, have a year later, we have the TSM team that went to Worlds. Now, before everyone memes like, oh, but they went out in the group stage, like, realistically, obviously, they won the split in NA. They looked very dominant. It was a shock, actually, that they failed to get out of the group. And then finally, the third team is going to be this year's Fnatic, 2018 Fnatic, another team that's very good domestically, and a team that, okay, while we're recording this, I can't know what date it's coming out, people at this point in time still think have a fabulous chance to do at Worlds. I've even heard some people make the case maybe they could be the best Western team, although to be fair, this Worlds actually looks more wide open than any other anyway, so that actually might already be able to yield a team a better result. So what we'll do is, those are the 3 teams, but before we start, a factor that we discussed before we made the show, which I think is a very important one, is whenever you do any kind of list, this is actually a problem, I think, personally, by the way. Maybe we'll do an episode on this one day, about when they do like the world's top 20 or whatever, you know, where they try to rank these players. Is I've done a lot of top X lists in my own career, and if you just do it purely based on your own opinion, then you will often get into scenarios where your bias is like, well, I don't think that counts for this person. But then later on, it's someone you like, and you go, oh, but they did this thing. And it's like, well, that's the same factor you discounted for the other guy. So what you should always do is, before you make the list, before you get into like trying to figure out is number is this guy number 2 or number 3? You should figure out what are the criteria you're actually judging them on. And how do you like weight those criteria? Then go and judge them. Because in doing so, first of all, you'll be consistent. Like no one can then say, oh, but you judged team 8 on a criteria you didn't judge team 2 on. But more importantly, every now and then you'll actually find that if you make yourself be consistent, you personally, from your own bias, might have ranked someone higher or lower, but you'll be like, well, actually, if I'm going to punish this team for that fact, I've got to punish this time I like for it as well. So let's start there, right? So give me what would be the first criteria for being the best team to go to Worlds? What would spring to mind first of all?
First of all, like their strength versus international teams, like that has to matter. Like how good is this team internationally? Because we are talking about the best Western team at Worlds ever.
Yes.
So if you're gonna be garbage, like compared to the international teams, then we can't really rank you very highly.
Yes. So obviously a factor in that sense that will help a team, just to give an example, would be if they went to an IEM tournament and played against a Chinese or a Korean team, or if they went to the MSI when that existed. I mean, obviously it still exists now, but you know, like it didn't always in history. So that's like a direct way to see that. Okay, another criteria, an obvious one to me, when he's setting this up, since as we say, it's going into Worlds, not at Worlds itself and what did happen, it's got to be what you did domestically, because that basically in League of Legends is what makes you a team that goes to Worlds, and more importantly, makes you a team that gets hype going into Worlds. Now, luckily, obviously, all the 3 teams we picked have won splits, etc. But we'll be able to debate between them which was harder and how well they did, etc. What would another criteria be, do you think?
I also want to talk about player strength, like how strong some of the players were on that team. Like if you have a player that's like absolute god tier, like that's very hyped going into Worlds, yes. Your team is gonna be counted much stronger. Because I mean, teams are a combination of individual players, obviously.
Yes. And then the last criterion that we actually picked out for this one is going to be easily the most subjective. It's actually impossible to objectively say this, but the reason why I include this is because I just a very quick side tangent, Loco. Whenever anyone says in my content that's like not supposed to be like pure journalism, like, oh, you're really biased, I always tell them, well, yeah, I am. That's the whole point. You know, I'm giving my opinion, and my opinion is biased because whatever my biases are inform my opinion. So the reason I say this here is because some people might think that you should exclude that. Well, here's the thing. If you're doing an article that's like writing the facts about someone's career or something, yeah, you shouldn't put in a lot of bias. But if you if you're discussing and debating what you think about something, then one of the most important criteria, even though you can't quantify it, is the eye test. And that just literally means when you look with your eyes at the team and you see the way they play and the way they won a game and the way that they matched up, it's how impressive that is, basically. And so that's a very interesting one because you can obviously get into scenarios where someone on paper had an amazing record, but maybe the eye test was like, they're just barely winning these games. So you know what, they win the game, but the opponent doesn't look very good. Meanwhile, you have some teams there, the record might not be as crazy, but they look fucking amazing in the game. I mean, I would obviously give, like, as a classic example, because they're not going to be in this episode, whenever that Samsung White team that eventually won Worlds used to not win LCK, because remember, they always used to make it to the semi-finals, play Blue, lose to them, and then not win LCK. Well, the problem is, because they only ever lost to Blue, and Blue had, like, one of the only teams that could counter them, every game except when they played Blue, they still looked like the best team to me. I used to think they were going to win every season, mate, because they were so godlike against everyone else. The eye test for them was amazing, whereas actually, funnily enough, Blue was doing better domestically, but the eye test for them actually looked like, it's always late game, and they've got to play very carefully, you know. So anyway, that's just an example to explain that one. So let's go and discuss a little bit for the first team using this criteria. So we'll go like that. We'll do each team separately, and then let's compare them all across the board. And then we'll, at the end, like, there's not really going to be a conclusion as to who wins. You know, the fans can decide that. We'll decide in our own brains who we think's won and hold that forevermore. So let's start then with the Fnatic team. Now, this is a team, Loco, where even though people are going to expect, because you worked with TSM and you have obviously played in the NA region, people are going to think you're going to be mad biased to the NA region. But I actually get the sense that this Fnatic team in 2015 is one you have a lot of respect for, right?
Yeah, I mean, they smashed us at MSI, so I'm going to have a lot of respect for them. And I also have a lot of respect for Daylor, Rainover, Huni, Reckles. Like, I'm good friends with a lot of people that were on this roster, and I learned a lot from them. So, I mean, and honestly, I'm not that biased. I like TSM, but I try to stay very, very real to like accomplishments and how good the team was. So why don't we go over the roster a little about like who this Fnatic team actually was? And yeah.
Yeah, so the key thing to mention with the Fnatic team, and this is what actually makes this first one tricky, is that in the first split in MSI was when they had Steel back as the AD carry, and then it was for the summer split that Reckless came back in and they went to Worlds. So that one, I will admit, makes it a bit trickier because it's hard to gauge like whether all the results count the same way, where some of the other lineups we're going to give, some of them might have just had the same lineup the whole time. So in the spring was where they came in and they had famously, it was actually dubbed as like Yellow Star and the 4 rookies, because you had Yellow Star, who remained from the old Fnatic, who was an amazing player, obviously, was the captain. You had these 2 Korean players brought in, Hooney, who'd been on the Samsung Red team. And if you're thinking Samsung Red, there wasn't a Samsung Red, there was white and blue. It's like, yes, because that was like the 3rd team of Samsung, where they were like training up future prospects, etc. And it was actually when they went to Worlds that Fnatic in some boot camp found one of the players there, which was Hooney, which is the top laner, who hadn't ever played in the LCK, never been in OGN. He was actually a true rookie to competition. So they brought him in. As a jungler, they brought in Game Over. Oh, sorry, I meant Rain Over, but that was his nickname, which is why I'm bringing this up, because famously, Rain Over, when he played for, I forget which one, was it Incredible Miracle 2?
Yeah, I am.
It was one of them, right? So when he played for this team, he played only a couple of games in the LCK. It was OGN back then. He wasn't someone who, to be fair, who played like 3 seasons or something, but it wasn't very good, and that's the reason this kind of derogatory nickname was given by the Korean fans of Game Over, because basically, I mean, if you're a jungler who does terribly, you can just ruin the whole game for your team. And also, let's be real, at that point in history, this is years later, the Incredible Miracle teams weren't that good at that point in time. They were having to just work with whatever talent they could get. So he wasn't hyped in any way. And then mid lane, they had Febevan, who again, now people are going to think of as, really good player, top mid laner. But at the time, he's someone who'd been stuck in the challenger scene. He played for Cloud9's European team, the Cloud9 Eclipse squad. And the storyline with that team was they used to always dominate and win like online competitions. Then they would go even to like the lands that were like the challenger lands, where it was like, the circuit that Riot had set up. They'd even win those, but every time it came to the actual promotion tournament itself, they never got in, and they were always failing. And so since he was an EU mid, EU's always about the matchups of the mids, and obviously we've got fabulous talent there. People used to literally call this guy a choker. Like, he had very sort of like a difficult reputation haunting him at the time that Fnatic picked him up. And even though he'd qualified at this point with H2K to get into the LCS, a lot of people thought to themselves, well, if you're comparing this guy to Expeke, who used to play this position, no one knew if he'd be good. And then you had, at the time, as I referenced, in the first split, it was a guy called Steelback, who's a French AD carry, also from the challenger scene at this point in time, and quite frankly, hadn't been like highly rated in the challenger scene. He was kind of the one that was picked up that I think was the most questionable anyway. And so there's the 5 players. They won the first split, but I'll just give the basic details of that so people know the context. The first split was the one, if everyone remembers, where for most of the split, it was actually the SK Gaming lineup with like Forgiven and Svenskeren that was the best team. They actually won the regular portion, but the Fnatic team was like top 2, top 3 the whole time. It was between them, H2K, and the SK team. And then in the playoffs, they managed to make it to the final. They had a really close series against H2K, 3-2. In the final, they played Unicorns of Love, who was like a breakout team, very shocking with Power of Evil and Kikis. They beat them 3-2. So this was all very, very narrow, which is why we can now bring you in again, Loco. When MSI was coming up, you did say the infamous line, right? That Fnatic will crash and burn was the line, right?
Okay. So Fnatic, this team, the 2015 we're judging them going into Worlds. Like, them in spring were obviously not that good. They weren't that good. And even though they won finals, oh my God, that finals was so bad. I watched that finals, like Unicorns of Love versus Fnatic, and it was just a shit show. Compared to how we were playing in NA, they weren't playing as clean. They were very like undisciplined and taking random fights and barely scraping out ahead of Unicorns of Love, who was a very kind of team. So yeah, I wasn't impressed with them at all, and they improved a lot going into MSI. At MSI, like, they did amazing. They did smash us. Oh my God. And they played a very, very close series versus SKT. I think it was the results were 3-2.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, they did amazing there. And then they went on to have a perfect season. And then and then they went versus Origin in the finals, another close series. If I remember correctly, it was 3-2. And then they went into Worlds. So that team, like, their lead up was really, really good. Like, how they led up to Worlds. But the beginning of that team with Steelback and the final form of that team with Freckles were completely 2 different teams.
Okay.
So In
So here's
terms
the
of
thing: why don't we make the initial criteria the player strength then? Since obviously we've already started laying out who the players are, and then obviously they bring Reckless in, who at the time had been in the Elements team, where he briefly tried to make that some kind of a super team, and he'd come back. Right? What do you think in terms of player strength for this team? What kind of like not we don't have to give a number, but how strong were they man for man? Do you think?
Featherman, I mean, infamous for solo killing Faker, having a wide pull. Like Featherman was one of the better mids at Worlds. I would say he was. It's hard to go back and exactly say, but he was a Western player that I thought was extremely good. Top 5 at Worlds in his role, not top 5 overall, top 5 in his role. Huni, while he was really good, he was very outclassed at that Worlds by 2 players. Infamously Smep from Coup Tigers and Marin from SKT. So while he was really good, there was a class level difference. He might have been the 3rd best player at that Worlds in terms of top lane, but just in terms of levels, Marin and Smep were up here and Huni was below, even if he was top 3. So for Reignover is hard to judge because he's like a role player that fit in extremely well to that team. That team wouldn't function well without Reignover, and he was super crucial. But if you put Reignover on a different team, he also wouldn't have that high of a value. So I would say he was a good player. He was a decent to good player, playing a perfect role on that team. And same thing goes for Yellow Star. That team needed a leader, needed an emotional rock, needed someone that could shot call and keep all the young kids together, and Yellow Star did that. And honestly, Reckles was nowhere near anywhere the best AD at that tournament.
Yes.
I even think Double Lift was better back then. Who else? Like there was Imp at that tournament, and obviously Imp did really bad, but still like Reckles was nowhere near like top of the AD carry. So
yes,
they're a team with very high strength, but also with very low player strength, in my opinion. But they just functioned really well together as a group.
Yeah. The problem with that team, and this is one of the things that, to be fair, we have the benefit of history, you know, we're so far away from there, and you've seen what players have done since. Like, for example, obviously seeing what Reignover's done in different teams, so he was very good in Immortals, but then when he was in CLG, wasn't really that great. We can now get a much more reasonable sense of these players, but at the time, as you might expect, if you go undefeated in the split, you're going to naturally get overhyped. Like, I remember people were really trying to say that these were all, like, you know, the best players from the West going to Worlds, etc. And, like, that is pretty unreasonable. Like, Huni was clearly, yes, of all the Western players, he was amazing, especially because at the time people weren't really playing in the West carry champions in the top lane. Like, it was typically, like, for example, his main rival in Europe was actually like either Soaz, who kind of like usually played like bruisers, you know, or it was Oduamne, who famously just played tanks, which is what the meta was in Season 5, you know. Ideally, you want a really good tank, probably like a Maokai, something like that, who just tanks up damage. And so Huni, first of all, was super interesting in as much as he was like very iconoclastic for how everyone else was playing. And I actually think he's a great example of a player where people either go so hard in favour of him and say he was the best, or they say shit when he did badly. But I think the reason why is pretty obvious, is that in some ways he had like the mentality of like a really good solo queue player, where he's going to try and smash the lane, he wants to beat his opponent, and so if he can do that, he will snowball the whole game. He'll get a kill, get 2 kills, keep getting kills, just transfer that, win the whole game. The problem is, the reason why I say it's like a solo queue player, and this is something that's very unique actually, a lot of Korean players, especially the great top lanes, don't do this, is he had the flaw of the solo queue player where if he was playing someone a bit better than him and he couldn't smash the lane and beat them in solo kills, and in fact, if he got behind, and most famously people saw this against Smeb at Worlds, he would also feed, because he'd basically have that mentality of like, well, I've got to get back the kill I just lost, and I've still got to beat this guy, and you know, I can beat this guy. And so what he couldn't do, unlike some of the top laners at the time, was he couldn't sort of be like, right, well, I've lost a kill there, so I've just got to play this one out safe and let the rest of the team carry me, and I'm just going to try and get to a team fight with like 2 items. That like never entered this guy's brain. So on one hand, in a way, it was kind of genius, and it looked amazing when it worked. Like, when it worked, you were like, how can anyone play this aggressive? But the problem is, as we're alluding to, if you'd put him, I mean, he didn't have to go against Marin, but if you'd have put him against Marin, as obviously you saw it against Smeb, where Smeb even played like reverse matchups and beat him. And to be honest, I think even if you'd have put him at the same tournament, Someday was there. Okay, yeah. Someday was playing tanks, but even Someday, I think, would have been able to like deal with his pressure, you know, and he wouldn't have been able to smash the lane. So I actually think Huni was a very strong player, and I'm not someone who downplays him at all. It's just that he was the rare type of really strong player who also had like a really glaring weakness, you know. Oftentimes, you can be not the best player, but it's rare that someone that good has like it's like he really was a guy who could win you the game or literally lose you the game as well.
I also think Huni would have not made his name so much if he didn't play in NA and EU, where he got to smash lower tier players very often and really got to boost his name. If he just played continuously in Korea, I don't think he would have reached the same kind of fame or same kind of like notoriety. I mean, we saw that on SKT. Like, he was good, but he was very flawed piece on SKT.
Yes, and then obviously because he had Reignover in both Immortals and in Fnatic, I think that also heavily contributed to why he looked so good. Because what we've discovered about Reignover is if you want to be like a super aggressive, like smash the lane top laner, well, obviously you're going to need your jungle to help you a lot. At minimum, even just knowing where the other jungler is, but hopefully ganking your lane, camping for you. And Reignover, I mean, in this team, in a way, this is one of those examples, right, where I think it's almost accidental that you get something that works. Because I don't think they ever sat down with the coach, and the coach was like, right, Reignover, you're just going to camp the top lane all the time. It's like, these were the only two Korean players, and Huni didn't have great English, so
and
it's logical, right?
Going to be like, take my lane, take my lane, take my lane. I'm going to build a wave, and then we're going to fucking kill this guy, like... So of course, like Reignover's like kind of forced to go top, and he was just very good at enabling that. And also, why this team was kind of accidental. The people that built them weren't sitting down thinking, okay, who needs a very aggressive top laner? Yes. We're gonna get a supportive jungler for him, and then we're gonna need a bot that's gonna be pretty resource free, but still okay with playing resource free. Yeah. So I put all these pieces together, and we have Fnatic 2015. No, it's more like, oh my god, these are the only scraps we had, and like, please God, please let us work, let us not get relegated. Like, that was the result. Yes. It was an accidentally great team.
Well, another factor that was also accidental, right, is like, because Febiven did so well on this team, after that, he got to be like, for example, obviously Huni and Reignover left, he got to be like one of the stars of Fnatic, and then later he was in H2K, and obviously now in Clutch Gaming. And to be honest, he never looked as good in those teams because people thought, right, he should be the star carry now. But if you notice in this team, he because they had Huni and they played so much through top, actually what they used to do with Febiven, I always used to, my nickname for him was the insurance policy, because since Huni just took carries, which weren't actually like, you know, champions you'd ban anyway, it meant that Febiven could get the mid lane counter pick quite a lot of the time. And so when you were playing through top anyway, well, you could win the game as a result anyway, because Huni's going to smash the lane in Europe. But if he doesn't, Febiven's got a champion that is nice lane. He's done his laning phase well. He's actually a mechanically strong player. So it's like, if you didn't win the game already, then he's going to be there in the team fights, and he would be excellent then. And as you said, probably the biggest key, and this is a part that I feel like a lot of Westerners have missed about having a carry top lane and why you can't really do it. It's like the reason why I don't anymore ever say, when like Flames in North America, just put him on carries all the time. It's like, to make that work, you have to have a very special type of a bot lane. Like, you have to have people who can basically withstand pressure without ganks, still do well enough that the AD carry can do his job and last hit people in the team fight and not die. And at the same time, you have to win so hard through top that it makes it worth it. And so in this particular case, that's why I think the spring split one wasn't as good, because Steelback wasn't that great AD carry, and Yellow Star was never like a mechanically like dominant lane support. You know, he wasn't like a Mata or something like that, or even if you want to give European examples, he wasn't like Kasing or Hillasang or something. You know, he was very much more like the roaming guy and the guy who's playing for the rest of the team, and kind of like the supportive support in that sense. You know, he wasn't like a dominant force. Well, the key thing is, it was almost a perfect move in summer that they got to get Reckless back, because the Reckless they got back, because he just failed so hard as well, he's not going to come in and be like, I'm the superstar, give me everything. It's like, no, he's happy he's allowed to join this team. And so what they did was, they basically just got him, and they just sort of told him, by the way, what he's always, at that time, he loved to do anyway, which is just play safe, farm up the bot lane, wait till a team fight. I mean, I always used to say this kind of a bit mean, just because that's my personality, you know. But I mean, in a way, he was doing his job. And then his job was what you can say about AD carries if they're not like an Uzi, which is you basically do just you just last hit people in team fights. Yeah, so that's kind of your job, you know. Yeah, but if you do it and you have a team like this, that's exactly what you want. You've already had Huni win the laning phase. You've already got Febiven for all the burst damage. All you need at this point is a guy who's going to play very safe, never give himself up to die, which is exactly what Reckless used to be like, and is just going to last hit everyone. So I will say this. Since then, in later seasons, Reckless has tried to be like a real carry and to be like the main star of the team. And by the way, I have a lot of respect for that. But at this point in time, it was probably the perfect setup. Like, I think his mentality fit with where the team was. So, yeah, I'm kind of with you on this one. It's like there are clear strengths, and in their own way, all of these people are good at their roles. But put it this way, it's not even clear they're the best Western player at each role. I mean, obviously we mean from the Western regions, we're not counting the Koreans as Westerners. But I'm like on that sense, I do feel like at the time people did overhype those players a bit.
Yeah, I mean, this team was just so accidentally beautiful. Like, everything just worked out perfectly for them. We don't have a coach. Let's get this Daler guy who used to like coach poker players and now plays poker. Oh my God, he's the perfect coach to coach these 4 young guys plus Yellow Star. Huni Rainover, no kind of success in Korea, and it worked out beautifully for them. Same thing for Febiban, same thing for initially Steelback and then getting Reckles back. Everything was just accidentally really great. And also one other thing was usually the meta and usually League of Legends is more based around bot lane, but that year there was a lot of carry top laners that were viable, like Gnar extremely strong, Rumble extremely strong. And at Worlds,
Fiora.
Because of Riot's patch, like Fiora, Darius just got crazy strong.
Gangplank.
Gangplank, the meta, the timing of people coming together, the actual people coming together, everything just worked out beautifully for them. And also Europe that year, just a lot of teams broke apart, so it left it wide open for new teams like Unicorns of Love and this rebuilt Fnatic to really take over and make a mark. Like, the original Fnatic going away and those players deciding to not participate in Spring and go to Challenger was also a really great boon for this team. So yeah, like this team, I don't want to say they got lucky, but everything just worked out perfectly for them. Things that could have gone wrong didn't go wrong, and things that could have gone well just went well beyond anyone's expectation.
One thing I will say is when we move now to the criteria of like domestic play and how you perform there, right? On paper, it looks amazing because obviously if you go undefeated in the regular part of a split and then only one team really challenges you in the final, and I will say this piece of context, which is even though the final was 3-2, that is also because the Gangplank sort of like meta had just come in, and Soaz was one of the few top laners in Europe who could actually play that. So he was one of the only people who had sort of like an interesting wrinkle to the game that he could add in. And in fact, I think they had to ban it for the 5th game or something. So I actually think that one was like a little bit overblown how close it was overall, because yes, they were very dominant. But one thing I will say is context for this is, on paper it looks amazing, but I actually don't think the EULCS was super strong at the time. Like in that summer split rather, it was like very stratified. Like you had Fnatic won every game, Origin was like right below them and basically pretty much only lost to Fnatic. And then just below them, you had another team that generally only lost to the teams above, which was H2K at the time. But this was the lineup when they had like Lulex as the jungler and they had Hjarnan as the AD carry. They had this particular lineup with Ryu, obviously. And then after that, most of the teams were like very up and down, because if you remember, the guy, as I said, in spring when SK had been the best team initially, Forgiven was actually the MVP of the league, and famously he had a dispute with the team. He left and he joined that Gambit team, and in the Gambit team, they bizarrely, their coach was French and their top laner was French, Clabachard, and they didn't ever play around AD carry basically. So as a result, the Gambit team was very up and down, and famously Forgiven actually got suspended towards the end of the split, so they couldn't even get the playoffs. And that was actually one of the only teams that in theory people thought from scrims was going to be able to challenge these teams. So as a result, like the actual split itself, I don't think was one of the most strong in Europe, and compared to some of the ones we might talk about later when we contrast them. And more importantly, like it was very stratified. Like the number 5 team wasn't going to beat Fnatic. In fact, I think in this split when they won 18 games, I think there were legit only 2 games that they almost lost. There was one to Origin where Origin kind of like threw it a bit, and there was one where H2K had like a lead, but the problem is the H2K players weren't that sick in this particular lineup, so it was hard for them to kind of close it out. So that's got to be a factor. So what would you say of the domestic dominance?
Yeah, I mean, kind of overblown. 18-0, incredibly impressive. I think their 18-0 doesn't come from pure skill, but comes from their mentality. That's one thing Daler coached extremely well. Like, this team was really disciplined. They never gave up. Their mentality was really, really great. They weren't 18-0 because they were the best fucking team ever. They were 18-0 because they were very, very mentally strong and never gave up. And, I mean, that is team strength, but that's not, like, really game strength. It's more mental strength than, like, video game strength, if you guys get what I'm trying to say.
Yes. Right. Let me think. What was the other criteria? Oh, wait a second. international competition. So now this is why I say it's tricky, because obviously it was the Steel back lineup that played internationally. So how do we weigh that up? How internationally well they did?
They were a surprise at MSI. I think their MSI performance, like 1 out of 10, I would probably give it. Actually, I would probably give it a pretty high score, like probably somewhere around like 8 or maybe on the low end, like 7 out of 10. They came in really strong. Surprised us at groups and surprised the world at groups. And they went 3-2 versus SKT, and it was a really close series. And you guys might think, oh, SKT, like, I know people are prisoner of the moments, and they might think, SKT, they're not that good. Like, they're not even at Worlds. Like, Faker's time is donezo. But SKT back then was, oh my God, they were crazy good. They were, like, the team to beat. They were the number 1 team. Like, everyone just talked about them as they were unbeatable. Like, SKT going to 5 games with Fnatic was actually very impressive from Fnatic. I think that MSI performance has to get something like 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10.
Yes, especially because, like, if people remember, obviously MSI comes after the spring split, and okay, sure, in Korea, actually the GE Tigers, the team that became Ku and Rox, had been very good, but famously, this is how good SK Telecom was. When they got to the final, that was when they were still rotating Easy Hoon and Faker, right? And what they used to do, a very Korean way of doing it, is they would play Easy Hoon first, and if you could beat Easy Hoon enough, then Faker came in as like the final boss to close you out. Well, this is how good they were. Faker didn't even have to play in the final. They just won 3-0 and it was just easy on the whole time. So if you don't even have to play your best player, probably a pretty fucking good team. And actually in the semi-final at MSI, I think a factor that shows the respect actually that SK Telecom had after the group stage is they didn't play Easy Hoon in that series. They played Faker as for, I think, all 5 games as I remember. So that actually shows, if anything, that they didn't think that it was worth sort of like risking the other approach. And also maybe they thought from looking at it, Febiven's a pretty strong mechanical player, you know, you want to put someone who can go head to head with that. So I agree. I think generally pretty strong international performance at this point in history as well. I know now, as you say, in later years, SK Telecom got weaker. Obviously last year they had some problems at Worlds. At this point in time, nobody goes 5 games if you're the Western team with SK Telecom. You know, you're lucky if you win 1 game. That's like the dream if you can. So I agree. I think that's a pretty high rating overall for that one. What was the last criteria? I'm forgetting what it was.
Well, we should talk about, or actually, we're going into Worlds, so we don't talk about Worlds at all. The eye test and we already talked about player strength.
Yes.
So
okay, the eye test then. What would you say for the eye test?
It was really deceivingly strong because they played against, as we said, like shitty teams domestically, and they were just like smashing them from topside. And if you weren't better than Huni, if your top laner wasn't better than Huni, it was really hard to beat this team. So, because Huni really didn't have to play versus any top laners that were better than them, they were like smashing people. But I think this is where I test is a little deceiving. Even though we knew they were smashing people and they were incredibly strong, they really weren't that incredibly strong comparatively. It was a lot of fluff from beating other European top laners that weren't as good.
Like, one thing I will say about this team was, at that particular time, this is another reason why, in a way, they might have been a little bit lucky. Is like, this was one of the only times in history in Season 5 where Europe actually set the global meta in League of Legends when they made other lane swap meta, where you had to do these lane swaps, basically, so that, like, you could get your bottom lane ahead if you wanted, or you could get the top lane in a certain matchup that you wanted. And at the time, that was the exact split it was done. It was the summer split of Season 5 from what I remember. And so basically, however good you were at that already set whether you could be a top team. And Europe was kind of ahead of the game on that. In fact, even Koreans admitted they like copied this, you know, they figured out how to do it before Worlds. So they definitely knew what they were doing with that. They had all that figured out. And it seemed very good coaching in that sense. Or someone like Yellow Star had very good input, you know. And then, so in a sense, in the game itself as well, they had pretty good macro. Like, they always generally seemed to know what they were doing and how to set up the Baron, etc. But the problem is, like, alluding to what you said there, I can't really judge them because when I think of all the other great teams in history, I can think of all these games where, you know, they were behind tons of gold and they had to do an amazing move in macro move to get back in the game, or, you know, they had like a bad comp and they out team fought with it. I don't feel like, from memory, I might be missing a couple of games, but from what I remember, this team generally was like front running. They just won the games, you know. They weren't really tested in that respect before they got to Worlds. So it's hard to really say that like you're gods of macro. Like, to me, part of how you tell how good someone is at macro is if you can get out of a bad situation, you know. It can't always just be if you're ahead. Like, a lot of people can use a lead and win a game if you're a good team.
I mean, this team did come back time to time, but they were doing it versus the European team. Like I think their macro was really disciplined. It wasn't like creative. They knew how to snowball top. They knew what to do when they were behind. Like the one special part of this team that no other Western teams still have to this day is they're very disciplined. Like it doesn't matter if they're behind. It doesn't matter if they're ahead. They play a certain way and they play that how they should. And I think a lot of credit goes to Yellowstar and Daylor. Daylor for like the outside coaching and teaching these players to never tilt, and Yellowstar like in-game shot calling and being like, yo guys, it's fine, or like yo guys, now we need to slow down. I remember just certain clips and like from talking to Reckles, from talking to Rainover, like what parts like Yellowstar and Daylor and also Rainover contributed, but they were a very, very disciplined team, and that's something very special about them.
I even think that actually is a factor that is played into by the fact that, as you say, the coach wasn't someone who was like a famous League of Legends coach. You know, he's coming from poker. Well, if you know anything about poker, you can't in poker take the outcome of a hand and then like if you lose it, go, oh, well, I played it wrong, and like, or if you win, go, well, I played it right. You actually have to have the mentality of like playing it correctly, no matter what, because the idea is if you play it correctly in the long run, you will win in poker. It's not about the individual result here. Well, you add that to the fact that because they were undefeated going through the split, I actually think that that was an element of his coaching that was very good, is that they didn't win the game and go, well, everyone did great, don't worry. It's like if they still had some points to make, you would make a point like, don't do this like this way. And more importantly, if you're undefeated, you've got a goal just in that sense to try and keep it going. Okay, let's be the first undefeated team. Like, let's win every game. Oh, we've won 14 games, right? We've got to win 15, you know. Otherwise, if you're a team that's like 12-2, and you've already lost, at that point, it's just about staying number one, you know. You might not have the same diligence, you know, because at this point, what was great was they were basically competing against themselves. They were trying to go undefeated. So I think that kept everyone kind of like locked into the same kind of zone. So, okay, there's Fnatic 2015. People already know what happened at Worlds. You know, they got out of their group. They beat EDG. They played against Coup Tigers and lost. And they finished top 4. So, good. Now let's go to TSM 2016. Now, just for context, even if I joked before, Loco has like NA bias and TSM bias, to be fair, Loco wasn't coaching this team. Like, it's not like it's his team and it's really biased.
It was the year after me and TSM parted ways, so I actually didn't like them, and I disliked this team, if anything.
Loco, as someone who knows you on a personal level, you could probably admit this, right? I've admitted it myself in interviews when I'm trying to like draw it out of players, but players will never say this because it sounds bad politically, right? If someone like talks shit to me, or if I had like a job, for example, and I got fired from it, okay, on a human level, yeah, I hope like, you know, everyone has a great life and that. But part of me secretly, the ego part of me, hopes they fucking fail and they do really badly, and they don't even just do worse than me, they do terribly. And in fact, obviously, I'll even go further just for a joke and say, secretly, I'm hoping they like come crawling back to me, like, oh, please, I need you to come back, you were so good. Like, I'm just admitting it. There's a part of me that isn't perfect, Loco, and that is what I think.
Yeah.
Was there part of you was thinking that when this team was put together?
No, you know me, I'm very humble, you know, like I love everyone. I wish you guys do better than I ever did when I was coaching TSM. Of course I fucking wanted them to do badly. Of course I wanted them to not even make playoffs. Of course I wanted them to... Of course I wanted that to be the first year where TSM doesn't make finals, where TSM doesn't make world. Of course, Thorin, what the fuck do you mean? Like, of course I wanted them to do badly. Like, okay. Yes, like, are you happy now? Are you happy?
Yes, all the cards are on the table on this one. Good, right. Now we've got that established. Let's talk about this team then. So, to give the basic quick rundown, they also, like Fnatic, had a player change because in the spring split, they put together the lineup. And I have to say, this is a rough one because everyone remembers in the spring split, they were doing really badly. And then they eventually made it to the finals, but they lost to CLG. And so it's funny, people look back on that. And because they take the result that they didn't win, everyone talks like the team was terrible. Like, on paper, I think that was one of the sickest jobs Reginald's ever done as a general manager. Because if you remember, this was where they basically only kept Bjergsen. That was it. Bjergsen stayed, and then they got Hauntzer, who at the time the year before had looked like a pretty promising NA top laner when he'd been on the Gravity team. And plus, he was replacing Dyrus, who at this point in time was just a tank player, basically. So it's not like he had to be some amazing player to replace him. So that seemed fine. Then, as a jungler, they got Sven Skaren, who, as I'd said, talked about in the Fnatic thing. A year before, in the spring split of Season 5, he was on the best team. It was SK Gaming, and that actually, he was one of the best players. And he was, at the time, I know he didn't become this in TSM later, but he was a very mechanically strong jungler. Like, he was like a duelist, you know, yeah.
That was the 5.5k. If that was like 5.5,
yes, the meme.
Where the H2K guy was like, we're going to pay you 5.5k. And that became like infamous.
Yes, and then obviously, as we said, the mid laner was still Bjergsen, and then the bot lane they put together. Like, I know now we can see the flaws with it, but at the time it sounded amazing because, again, as I said, unfortunately, because Fnatic, the very team we were talking about, had been so dominant, it made people overrate players in a sense of, like, they didn't look at Yellowstar and go, right, he's good in these ways. They were like, no, he's just the god support. In fact, if you remember, people were even saying crazy shit. Like, I remember, I think at Worlds the year before, Mata was like, Yellowstar's the best Western support. So people were like, oh my god, Mata said it. It's like, it's like if Mad Life gives you a compliment, you must be the godlike player. So, unfortunately, people thought... This is the dream to have Yellowstar as a support, but yeah.
People are prisoner of the moment, and because Yellowstar was coming off of that really great year with Fnatic, they thought Yellowstar was a god. Where actually, that was probably the end of Yellowstar's time after Fnatic, and that was probably the point he should have retired.
And then the AD carry obviously was the infamous doublelift, who at this point in time, he'd just won his first split, on the CLG team, but he'd left. And so there was obviously a lot of hype because he was the best AD carry, probably in the West, if I'm being honest. I thought he was better than Reckless, because the difference is, as we said, Reckless was sort of playing the cleanup AD carry style, whereas doublelift was AD carry. It was like what you think of as the traditional role. So now we've got I'll very quickly go through the results, I guess. We're going to go player by player in a minute. So this was the spring split one. In the spring split, they'd actually been doing terribly. I think they ended up with like the 5th seed or something. It wasn't great, but they did make a great run. Famously, they beat the Immortals team. They made it to the final. In the final, they played Doublelift's old team, CLG. CLG amazingly managed to win. This was the 5-game series. It was 3-2. Then in the summer, because it is true, of all the players, the one that clearly had struggled the most was Yellowstar. Because think about it, you're putting him with Doublelift, who's like a lane-dominant AD carry, and this is a guy who doesn't play lane-dominant support style, and even worse, wants to roam. And then the key quality was, they thought when he came in, he would be the shot caller of the whole team. But as far as I know, Yellowstar actually didn't want to do that at this point in his career. So it was kind of like they actually were off. They weren't on the same page in that sense. So they actually changed out players. Yellowstar went back to Europe, actually rejoined Fnatic. And you had Biofrost come in as a support, who at the time, this guy's basically a rookie. He wasn't some top
he was
player
a pure rookie. He hasn't even played an LCS split before. He came from Challenger.
Yes. And so in the summer split, it's worth pointing out, right? In the summer split, the format was, unlike Fnatic in their 18-0, this was best of threes. And in best of threes, holy shit, this team was dominant. I think they went something like 18-1 or something, 17-1, whatever it would be, I think they lost like one series, which I think was to Cloud9,
P1,
maybe, I think.
P1. No, they lost to P1, to Inori Rengar, I remember.
Okay, so they lost one series and then cruised through the playoffs, got to the final. Even that was fairly easy work, One that, like, it was just so clear the whole time they were going to win the split, so very dominant in that sense. And then obviously went to Worlds with a lot of hype around them. So what would you say? Let's go, since we've introduced the players already, let's go player by player. What do you think? What would you start with Hortzer then? We'll just go down the map.
Well, all these players, like, coming into the team were incredibly hyped. Like, Haunter was the best top laner in NA. Natural born NA top laner, Haunter was the best at that time, so it wasn't even a question to get Haunter. So it wasn't 100% sure I'd be gone by then, so I did get to give my recommendation. Then Haunter was my recommendation, and Andy wanted Haunter anyways. For jungle, Sven, it's hard to say. The Svenskeren they picked up and the Svenskeren they ended up with were completely different. So the end result of this team were play around mid and bottom. Bjergsen incredibly dominant, Doublelift incredibly dominant, and those two players were the ones they ended up playing around. So Svenskeren, he ended up being a great supportive jungler for that team, even though there was time where he would int or invade without really communicating. But he was an odd piece. I think the role he fulfilled wasn't what he's originally good at, but he learned to be good at. And then for mid lane, you have Bjerg. I mean, still at that point, the best Western player by far. Doublelift only won one tournament before joining TSM, so it was no question that it was Bjerg being the best Western player of all time. I mean, what
NA
to say?
Player at least.
Yeah, at least NA. But I mean, what to say? Bjerg was Bjerg. Dominant in lane, dominant in team fight, great shot calling, great team fighting. Not much to say. I guess the only thing that I could really take away is the shot calling part. He didn't want to do much of it.
Sure.
And there was places where he was flawed in shot calling, but Bjerg is Bjerg. There's honestly not much to say. For double, best Western AD carry of all time, EU and NA included. Yeah, I mean, this is when Double F started to really fix his career. That one finals victory with CLG, and after that, he's just been up and up and up. Like, this was the point where Double F really picked his shit up, and he started cementing himself as a legendary Western player. So,
and Biofrost.
Biofrost is a great fit for this team. I actually think Biofrost was probably the best person they could have got. I mean, it is in hindsight, but he wanted to learn. Double F needed someone to be his sidekick, someone that could play aggressive, someone that could make plays, and that would just listen to the big voices on the team. And Biofrost was perfect at that. He was a role player with strengths and playmaking, and that was willing to learn. So he just fit right in, and everything just worked out for that team.
Yeah, so if look at these players, like I'll do a brief rundown as well. If we go with Hortzer, like this is another example. In fact, you'll probably find this. I think if you ever extended the same analytical lens to any great team, there's always like an element of luck, you know, because when you put a team together, you can't really know how someone's strengths are going to match up or how someone would play off another player. But like Hortzer probably was the ideal top laner to put on this team right now, assuming we have to go with the talent that was already there. I mean, if I had to pick like a player now, I would put like Someday or something, you know, because what you basically needed, think about the team you've got. You've got Bjergsen and Doublelift, two of the best players in the NALCS, and crucially, two of the best carry players and lane dominant players. So in that scenario, you probably want your top laner to be someone who generally is going to be more playing tanks or bruisers. They're going to play for the team more. They're going to be someone who's going to facilitate basically those carries being as good as they are. Now, the upside of Hortzer was he could play some carries, but it's like he had the option to. And so the versatility was there. So sometimes if you really needed to, you could play through him. But generally, his job was just be a much better version of Dyrus. Basically, be a rock in the top lane, absorb all the pressure, don't have all the jungle the pressure, because obviously the bot lane's going to get a lot of it with this team, and get to team fights, not lost your lane, and then the other two are going to be so good they're going to smash their lane. And at that point in time, if you have basically 3 winning lanes or 2.5 winning lanes every game, I mean, a lot of coaches and players will tell you that's the dream scenario. You know, you're not playing from behind. Yeah. You're not going to make tough decisions. It's like if you have the best players as well, you get the team fight ahead, you should win. Like, that's just a logical condition. Then you look at Svenskeren. I think he's one of the few players in this team I think was very flawed, because as we referenced, he was a fabulous player in Europe. And in fact, if you could have made that player play in this team, maybe it would have been what could have put them over the edge. But for whatever reason, I know it's something that's been debated a lot and no one will ever really know. In TSM, they had a different vision of the jungle, or maybe they didn't know how to coach that specific position. Whatever the situation was, he became something of like a ward bot, you know. His job was basically, unfortunately, don't die, because he had a lot of like very embarrassing scenarios where he wasn't always playing with his laner, or he would get caught out, or he just had to come to people's lanes. It was kind of a bit depressing for his role, but when you have all your lanes winning, you can survive like that. You don't have to out jungle everyone or fucking path like a god all the times, you know. So they could kind of survive that liability, and it wasn't enough of a problem, at least in NA, that it was going to really cost you the game. Did you have something to say on that? Looks like you do.
Yeah, so jungling for that team is incredibly hard, because you have Double and Bjerg, who are very, very resource-heavy players, and they're going to require a lot of ganks, a lot of vision, and they want to be played towards, and rightfully so. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think it was necessarily just Svenskeren being bad or not being able to adapt. Jungling for that team for anyone was going to be incredibly hard.
Oh, and also, to be fair, I'll add in, if you just think logically about the way like someone would structure how to play a team, not only are Bjergsen and Doublelift going to be incredibly demanding that you come and help them, either not even just to gank, just to show presence in their lane, you know, stop the other jungler coming, but when the enemy team knows that you're going to play around those players, they're also going to try and gank your top lane. So as a result, he also has to figure out when he goes to the top lane and relieve pressure for that. So basically, my joke for Svenskeren here would be, he's basically in like the nightmare scenario if you play like jungle in like Diamond or something, where every player the whole game's like, just come to my lane, I'll get a kill, come to my lane. Why aren't you coming to my lane? Like, I'm getting killed. Like, he was basically like the guy getting hard flamed by all the fucking solo queue play, except on a pro level, you know. I'm obviously exaggerating a bit there, but that's kind of the spot he was in, you know. In some of the other teams, like the team we talked about before, the Fnatic team, as we say in English, like, it's pretty obvious which way your bread is buttered that way. Like, you're going top lane most of the time. You're not going bot lane very often. And mid lane can take care of himself. So it's a lot easier life to be reign over in Fnatic than it is to be Svenskeren in TSM here. Right, then if we go to Bjergsen, I think at this point in time, I know in later seasons he had more flaws and more problems. At this point in time, I think Bjergsen was still at his absolute best. Like, he was still a very, very good player. I think, if anything, he'd gone from being like someone who was more of like a hard carry in past seasons to like, I think his game was more disciplined at this point in time because obviously he had more help in the team. You know, he didn't have to be the guy who won the game every time. But as a result, it's not even that he necessarily like smashed every game. There's just almost never any flaws in any games. Like, he's never going to do badly. He's going to do really well in terms of his champion pool. Like, it's a very disciplined kind of a game.
I can touch on this little because I knew Bjerg a lot back then. Bjerg started losing trust in his teammates in 2015 in Lust, in Dyrus, in Turtle, in Centauran. He lost trust in, the coaching staff also.
Sure.
He lost trust all around, but for this team, he was developing trust really well with everyone. He loved his teammates, and he trusted them to do their job. So I think Bjerg played with less pressure and felt less like he had to hard carry also.
And then if you go to the bot lane, like, first of all, again, this is another area where I feel like you don't even have to say luck. Like, a better way to say it in English is usually to say, like, the term is happenstance. It just means, like, it just happened to turn out this way. Because if you say luck, people think, like, you know, it's like, oh, it shouldn't have happened or something. No, it's just that when they put this lane together, because they lost Yellow Star and they got this rookie, well, first of all, I think the fact he was a rookie really helped. Because when he came in, he's not going to come in the door and be like, right, hey, Doublelift, I'm going to be leading the lane here, mate, and telling you what to do. He's not going to be like Choustra and be like, listen, shut the fuck up, do everything I say. It's the opposite. And actually, at this point in his career, if you think of where Doublelift's career was, one of the reasons why he didn't win in past seasons, sure, he had his own flaws as a player, but sometimes in some of those CLG teams, they would have like a good player, but a player that wouldn't hold up in the playoffs or would just break very easily. So at the time, Doublelift himself was a player who didn't have a lot of trust in his teammates and had kind of like felt like it's just I have to kind of like get mine, and then if they lose the game, well, they lost the game, it's not me. Well, as a result, if you give him a player who has some talent, but you sort of tell him, you're not literally telling him, but like the game's sort of telling him, you can tell this guy how to play. You tell him what you need of him. You command the lane. You set it all up. That's the dream scenario, because in that time, of course, you can trust this guy. He's doing what you're telling him to do. And on the rest of the map, you've got competent carries as well. You don't have to win your lane super hard, because I always feel like in League of Legends, that's a very underrated quality. If you know in your brain, you must smash the lane to win the game, you're also going to take more risks, and you might actually fuck more games up. Yeah, it's actually kind of depressing in a way, because people will then think that you're not as good a player as maybe you are. Whereas, like I said about Bjergsen there, if you know you've got all these great players, you can play like a disciplined game. So when it's not going well, you just play safe. When it is a chance, then you extend, you dominate, So I think in this season, in fact, this will tie into why I think this team was amazing player for player, except for Svenskeren maybe, is Doublelift in this season did not win the MVP. It was Bjergsen that was MVP. But they legitimately, in my opinion, had the two MVP candidates on one team. Like, basically, if you go back, as far as I remember, it was like 17 first place votes to like Bjergsen, I think maybe, in like 13 to Doublelift. So even the voters were like, it's literally, we're just deciding among one team who the MVP is. We're not even picking the star of some other team. So that alone tells you how strong these laners were and how strong these carries were. So you add all that together, there's not a lot of flaws in this team. Like, okay, let's try and think of some though. Like, I'll give you one, which is Biofrost probably benefited a lot from having Doublelift to be on TSM. Like, I think you've seen in other teams, he hadn't quite fully developed as a player because he was a rookie, right? So I guess you can't say he was like the clear best support player.
And definitely, Bio wasn't the best support player, but Bio was the best team. One thing I really want to contrast with the Fnatic lineup we talked about, Fnatic lineup was a lot of leftover pieces like coming together to make something beautiful. This one was a lot of the best pieces possible. Like, if you think of Fnatic dish...
That's why I give credit to Reggie, because he did put together great lineups in this fight.
Fnatic is like a dish that tastes so good by using like shitty ingredients, but like the chef like cooked it really well in an accidental way.
So it's basically like, what dish would that be, Loco? Because
it's like some kind of like street food that just tastes.
I'll give you the example. I know what it is, mate. Basically, Fnatic was like Buddha Jiggy, right? Which is this thing.
Buddha Jiggy?
You don't know what that is? Yes, you do.
No.
Obviously, I'm just pronouncing it.
Pudetsuge. Oh, yeah. I was like, I thought it was some Europe. Okay,
What
so
I'm
I'll-
talking about here is this famous like dish in Korea, which is very cheap,
Yeah.
by the way, and it's basically called like the GI's food because it was created for Americans. And what they do is they just get like leftover ingredients. They get some noodles, like some hot dogs, literally like the hot dog wiener, like the cheapest sausage you could possibly get, a bunch of
And
stuff, egg or whatever.
Spam.
Yeah, and the whole thing is you put it all in one thing, you heat it up, and in theory it should taste like shit because those are like the worst ingredients possible. But people love it, right? It's the ultimate like hangover food, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh my god.
That's the analogy for you.
And for TSM, they're like this high quality, like you get the best fish, you get the best steak, you get the best vegetable, like the most freshest ingredients, the most
Yes.
high quality ingredients, and you put it together like masterfully and like at a 3-star restaurant. Like that's TSM. Like they spared no expenses to get the best players, the most hyped up players possible, and then they made it work. So
Yes.
yeah, it's really different from how Fnatic was put together comparatively. And like,
Well, in this analogy then, Loco, you do source all the best items and you make the meal and the like Michelin star chef cooks it. And even if, like in the case of Svenskeren, for example, okay, the potatoes aren't perfect, you know, they're a little bit burned, but the meal's so amazing, you're not worried about it anyway. Like, you're going, this is fucking awesome anyway. Like, this is fine, you know. Okay, there's the analogy, right? It's harsh, but it's a good one. It is a good one. I think we got to a good one there.
Yeah, but they were the most hyped pieces put together. Yeah, and they were an amazing team. I think a team like that is never ever going to happen again in NA or Europe or even Korea because there's so many powerful organizations like holding powerful pieces. They'll never let go of their piece. Where this time, like TSM just went knock knock. Could we have double lift? Yes, we get double lift. Knock knock. Could we have yellow star? Yes, we get yellow star. They just went around like to every team and just like stealing their best like possible piece. Like nowadays, it's never ever going to be possible.
Well, literally in the case of Svenskeren, because that's where the meme came from. You know, HUK was like, right, he's going to sign the contract. What the fuck? And then that was the joke, wasn't it? He was like, I paid you 5.5 fucking K. It's like, which by the way, here's the thing on that one. No matter what side you come down on that debate, it's clearly hilarious. Like you've got to enjoy the memes on that one. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Right. What about this then? So we alluded to it before, but what about domestic dominance or domestic performance? What would you say for that?
I mean, they went 17-1 and they just smashed. And also, they had a real rival in Immortals. Immortals were incredibly strong in spring and summer.
But by the way, Immortals similarly, like if TSM was 17-1 or whatever, then Immortals was like 16-2 or something. You know, it was like 16-3 or whatever. Like they basically also had an insane record.
They had a rival that they were playing against consistently and that they needed to defeat. It wasn't like the Fnatic team where they smashed everyone, and Origin was kind of a rival. They always had a main rival in Immortals, and Immortals shot on them in spring in the regular season, and TSM shot on them back in the playoff.
Yes.
And during TSM's playoff run, or TSM's regular season and playoff run, obviously TSM was 17-1 and only dropped their set to P1, and in playoff they just smashed everyone. So yeah, Immortals put up a fight, but TSM was freaking dominant. They didn't go to MSI because they lost the first split to CLG, and CLG did really well at MSI. And then when CLG came back, TSM shot on CLG. So like by transitive properties, like we thought TSM would do well at Worlds. So it was kind of weird.
Yeah, that's actually why, even though, again, I mean, some EU fans who are just haters are going to say, like, this is bullshit, but I think this is the actual case. It's like, first of all, they had the dominance of, like, a Fnatic. Like, the record looked as good. But I actually think it's better, because as you say, first of all, Immortals was very legit. Now, listen, people can, I know this is a topic people don't want to believe, but you can be a very, very strong team and fail in the playoffs. You know, some people have issues, or maybe you're just not very well coached, or you don't practice very well. There's reasons it could happen. It's happened in history before. And then you've got to add in, as you said, that was the exact same CLG lineup that went to the final of MSI, that won the previous split. And they weren't even close to TSM at this point in time. Like I think they even might have played them in the semis and 3-0'd them. Like that was the one where it was like a joke. In fact, I think they even just boosted them to Worlds, like Team Liquid did to 100 Thieves this time. So, and then elsewhere in the league, you still had Cloud9. Like this is 2016. You know, they still had some good. This is like, I think when they already had Smoothie and, you know, solid fucking players. So, the NALCS, I know people often like to meme that it's not as good, because there are times when it's not as good. I don't think it was very good this year. But at this point in time, I think it was in a pretty good place. And actually, there was a bunch of strong teams. And even with strong teams, TSM was clearly the best. So I've got to give them high marks for that one. Like if we're talking domestic dominance, it's got to be a 9 or a 10. Like that's pretty fucking good.
And there were also very strong players playing back then. There was like Impact, Someday, Flame, and top lane. Like these, or maybe Someday wasn't there yet, but
No,
this
I don't
is
think
where
Flame was either, was he?
Flame was in 2015. After 2015, where did he go? Oh, he went back to Korea. Oh, so Flame wasn't there.
Yes, he was on Longview, that's right.
Yeah, I do remember like there being strong Korean imports. It wasn't just
it was Impact.
Impact, Piglet, Phoenix. Like there
obviously
were
we had Jensen was on Cloud9 and was one of the best players. Yeah, there was some very strong. Yeah, exactly. Piglet was on Team Liquid. We had players like Dardoch coming up. So yeah, there was some fucking really strong players in the LCS.
And they just smashed everyone to the ground. That's what was really them. They were good players, but no one could touch TSM. Yeah, I mean, this was a sick team. And going into Worlds, everyone said, like, it's funny because, like, in 2015, Fnatic said, this is the best. People that were supporting Fnatic said, this is the best team that's ever going to participate at World from the West. And then in 2016, they said the same thing about TSM. And TSM's catchphrase, or what everyone said about them, is anything but semis is a failure. Anything but semis is a failure. Make it out of groups, smash whoever in round of 8. Anything but a semis is a failure.
Oh, and just to touch on that before we move on to another criteria, I will, to address that topic, because obviously of the 3 teams on this list, now technically we can't know what Fnatic 2018 is going to do yet, so we can't know if they fail or succeed, but obviously Fnatic, they're one of the only ones that did get it done. They got to the semis. So when people compare them, which we'll do later, I just want to say in this context, as I said about the Immortals team in the regular season and then the playoffs, just because we know this TSM team didn't do well at Worlds and didn't go super deep, etc., doesn't mean that they weren't actually really strong going in. They clearly were. Now, I will say one flaw that they had, which actually, funnily enough, they sort of share with the Fnatic team I was listing before, is when you're that dominant, you don't always get tested in every area of your game. Like, if you really are winning pretty much every lane, all 3 lanes in the game, it's almost like you can revert the game to like season 2 at that point in time. You're not having to make some genius move in the middle of the game. You're not like, if you've got players that are that strong, it also becomes a lot easier to draft for them. You're not having to get one specific player on a certain champion.
Mm-hmm. Oh, also there was that copy pasta where they scrim versus Korean teams, and they were like, "Holy shit! Like Sven's movements around the jungle are so beautiful. Double F and Beard are so strong." Like there was that copy pasta. Like even Korean teams when they scrimmed them in boot camp were like, "Holy fuck! This team is fucking legit." I mean, the copy pasta is it's just meme, but people were legitimately really hyping this team, even in scrims. Like they were doing well versus Korean teams also. They weren't just like randomly hyped.
Okay. I mean, I guess we just touched on it there, but obviously in the case of this particular team, they didn't have the international factor though, because they didn't go to MSI.
Yeah,
nothing for that one then. Mm-hmm. Right, well then the last one is, and it kind of, I guess we were already sort of bringing it up there, is the eye test. So what would you say to the eye test?
Oh, they looked
it's a tough one, right?
They looked damn good when they played. Their team fight was really crisp. Like Haunter and Biofrost were very on point about when they needed to engage. They knew exactly who they had to play around, and they were very cohesive. For having so much star power, for having Bjergsen and Doublelift, probably the 2 best players ever to play in NA/LCS, and the 2 biggest egos. Like, what is it? Along with like Andy, who's also like a huge head figure. Like, this team just worked, and that was one of the most surprising parts about this team, like how well they worked. I think Parth really knew his role on the team. He knew, I don't really need to coach these guys, I just need to make sure they function. And he probably smoothed out opinions and smoothed out arguments they had and let them talk it out. By not coaching this team really heavily, this team was very well coached. Like some teams you need to coach really heavily. Like if Daylor coached this team, it wouldn't work. If Parth coached that 2015 Fnatic, it wouldn't work.
Yes.
But Parth was also the perfect coach to coach this team.
Well, especially since he didn't want to be a coach. He was an analyst and he just had to do it. So in a way, that's another example of happenstance, right, Loco? We didn't mention that. In the spring split, they had this other guy who was obviously Casey Woodbuck, who was like coming in from baseball, and that hadn't worked out very well. Like he couldn't win the respect of the players. He had his own issues with the management. They actually tried to reverse the decision very quickly, but they gave him a chance. It didn't work out. Now that's actually an example again of where sometimes circumstances just make it perfect. Because since he left, well, the season's already going on. There aren't a load of coaches you can just sign. And so since they just promoted Parth, well, as you say, if anything, this was a team where it's ideal to have someone who's not going to heavily coach them and who wasn't a coach. He does the draft for you. He gives you the basic info. Here's the picks. Here's what they might pick. You guys play the game because you've got the best players pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything just worked out perfect. I guess there were some accidental parts to this team. Like parts coming in and Biofrost being a really good fit. It was accidental, but way more planned out than Fnatic at least.
Yes, and then in terms of the eye test, like I agree. Whenever I used to watch their games, I myself hyped them. I thought they were going to do super sick at Worlds because the key thing I thought was, like, okay, it's true. Like I haven't seen much macro or them be forced to show that they're like geniuses and that stuff. And obviously, like when I looked at them, they didn't have a natural shot caller, so I didn't expect that to be like a strength. But you just looked at the raw ability and the fact that they win all the lanes, and then when they're in a team fight, even if they're down in a team fight, well, they have so many good players, so strong, they could win on almost every scenario, it felt like. So I thought to myself, I almost thought they were going to be like one of those Chinese teams where it's like they just have really beast players, and you always know that that gives you like a chance to beat anyone. So I actually even did think personally, I mean, they obviously did do it at Worlds, that they could win games against the Samsungs of the world. They could go against RNG. I thought this was really possible because the ITIS looked like, as you're saying, like one of the strongest Western teams we've ever sent to Worlds.
So guys, we talked about GG Esports earlier in the show, and they're the sponsor for this video. They actually have a lot of great stats. So before we talk about 2018 Fnatic, we're actually going to use some of their stats to kind of show you guys what we mean. So for 2018 Fnatic...
Because by the way, just like think logically, for the other years, we can't show you that. Like we have to go from our memory and stuff. We can't tell you what the lane stats for Bjergsen were in 2016. You know, sadly, we don't have that information. So I thought it would actually be pretty cool that we could actually lay this out before we give you like our subjective opinion, you know.
So we go to teams, and then obviously we're going to click on Fnatic. Like they're really high up in their own European power rankings. Let's click Fnatic. And some of the things that we really want to highlight with Fnatic is average 20-minute turret difference. Like they have 1.08. That means they're up one turret on average at 20 minutes. Average 20-minute dragons, one dragon. Average 25-minute goal difference, 2.67k. That's actually pretty decent for a lot of teams. And first Baron rate. This one's actually super important. 73% first Baron rate. First Baron usually means you get the first inhibitor, and first inhibitor win rate is really high. Yes. I can't recall off top of my head, but usually the team that gets first inhibitor has around 70%, 80% win rate. Yes. So like them having first Baron rate at 73% it's freaking crazy.
That's one of those things, you know, that they don't hype as much in the actual cast because it would actually ruin the game. Like if you knew, there's the same thing in Counter-Strike, by the way. If you get the first kill in a round, your chance of winning the round if you're a top team is like 75%. Well, the problem is if you were casting that way, it would ruin the game if you were like, they're probably going to win this, you know, like you want it to be hype, so you can't tell people all the time. They've got the first inhibitor. It's almost certain they're going to win the game now. You want to believe it's not the case, but yeah, on paper though, that is an insane stat.
Yeah, I mean, cast is about entertainment, and this is just going to predict who's going to win.
Yes.
These kind of stats are stuff people don't really want you to know about.
Yes, exactly.
So, I mean, for player, let's go to caps. So, 76% win rate, like that's freaking crazy. 68% kill participation. This one's actually really important because it shows how much Fnatic plays to them and how important part of the team caps plays. Like 8.8 KDA. These are like crazy stats. So that means Fnatic in 2018 summer in their playoffs and in their regular season just had an insane season. Champion pool 20, like we know Caps plays everything. Like we saw him play Vayne. That was crazy. I still can't believe he played Vayne. He plays Vayne, he plays Yasuo, he plays pretty much anything. There is some like bad things about Caps, like his reckless stat is at 12 because he is a player that goes for these high feed plays and can fuck up sometimes. So this stat does represent that. And he has a pretty high feed, pretty high instability. And all these stats are out of 20. So if you have 20 out of 20 in champion pool, that means you maxed out that score.
Right.
So if you go to a little bit more detailed player stats, let's go to strength profile. Actually, let's go back to player analysis. So these are their player ratings. So like 2,200, 2,000, obviously these are the higher ups. So when we look at the players in the high ones, like Chobi from Griffin, we have Brookie, we have Broxa, we have Caps. This is the win rate. So if you have high win rate and high rating, like that's the best of both worlds. Like, I mean, that's as good as it gets. And although like it's a little bit inflated for people like Caps and Broxa, because they play in a relatively weaker region, so they can have higher win rate, but their rating still being high is incredibly good. And another stat I really want to highlight is 137 CS at 15 minutes. This is on average. On average, he has 137 CS at 15 minutes in the last 10 games. last 10 games, that's like playoffs. This is like a crazy good stat. 70% kill participation. Like, yeah, I mean, this site really shows you like all the nitty gritty you want out of that player. Like, we can't go back and watch every single one of these like games that this player has played,
Sure.
but this gives you a good average of it. Let's look at another really hype player on Fnatic 2018. Reckles, 8.9 KDA, a little bit lower kill participation than Caps because obviously Fnatic 2018 plays a lot more around the mid and jungle, and Reckless is he's more of their insurance. But he has really high late game stats because Reckles is their key player in late game. Like late game, AD carries matter the most, and you do play around the ADC a lot more. And his team fight is 20. Like, I mean, obviously it's an ADC in a team fight, and he does well, so he's going to have very high stats. And another thing I want to highlight is his consistency, which is also at 20. Reckless is a very consistent player, never really dies doing dumb things, but also he's not someone that is very good at making his like own plays or getting a lead for the team. He slowly builds a lead, but that's where I really want to highlight his consistency, being 20 out of 20, like very important. So yeah, this is what the site is used for. It's not the primary use, but it's a really good usage for the site. Like by going through and looking at the players and their stats, you can tell how good this player is and which part of the game they're good at. And whenever I have an analysis for the player, I'll go back and check it against the site to see, oh, I am actually on point, or actually I'm wrong about this one and I need to go back and look at more of the matches. So
Okay.
yeah, that's how I personally use GG Esports. That's about it.
Right, so we'll now do what we did for the other teams, which is we'll use the same criteria we did before. So for this team, we had an interesting scenario where even though they technically had the same roster for both splits, they had obviously the scenario with Whippo coming in, which was a bit unusual. So what happened was in the spring split, obviously because of franchising happening in North America and a number of European talents going over there, they were in a position where a number of teams in the league were having totally different rosters. Like G2 was changing a whole bunch of their players. Obviously, like H2K, etc., had a different lineup. You know, all these different teams were changing, and Fnatic was one of the only teams that kept almost the same roster. They kept 4 players. The only one they lost was Jezis, the support player, and they got in Hillasang from formerly Unicorns of Love. And that was an interesting move in itself because Hillasang was someone who used to be like himself like a very strong, sort of like aggressive lane support, and they were going to put him with Reckless. And if you remember the story from last year, 2017 Fnatic, was what I alluded to earlier on when I was talking about 2015 Fnatic, where actually Reckless was trying to no longer be the old Reckless. He was trying to be like, I'm the star player. Like, he was basically, my joke is he kind of embraced being like the Forgiven of Europe. You know, he was trying to be like, make me the star player, play through my lane, like I'll win the game. Because remember, Caps was a rookie at the time, you know. He was someone who was like still very raw. They'd just gotten their coaching system fixed. And so coming into 2017, that's one of the reasons why people thought bringing in Hillasang was going to be good. Because if you want to be this like really strong AD carry and you want to be a laning AD carry as well, you want someone like that. You want a guy who can play a Thresh or something like that to go along with you in lane. So when this lineup was set, people already knew this should be a very good team because they don't have turnover of players. They've got the same core. There was already one of the better teams anyway. People remember at Worlds, they made it to the quarterfinals. But going into the split, people weren't sure if they would be number one, though. And there was still the G2 lineup, etc. Misfits obviously came back from Worlds with some different players. They ended up, by the end of the split, being the best. And then they won the split outright. Although they had that scenario where, like, I think Whippo maybe came in for, like, the playoffs of the split. I'm not certain. I think he came in for Soaz, because Soaz, I believe, like, broke his hand or something like that. He had, like, some sort of injury.
Oh, yeah.
And so Whippo initially came in just as a top lane sub and did very well. Like he went to, after they won the LCS, he went to MSI where they kind of like split time between the two. But again, Whippo was playing a bunch. Then we had the very weird scenario, which is going to be very different from past years, which is that in the summer split, obviously for the first, like, I would say like the first 5 weeks, it was all over the place because it was where,
you know, shit show.
It was where some teams didn't play AD carries, some teams played supports in the jungle. If you remember, Jankos from G2 was playing Braum, for example. You know, there's some very weird
There
moves.
was funnel, there was
yes.
non-ADC spot lane. Like, Meta was in a fucking shit show.
Yes.
And Reckles benched himself and Whippo played because, like, instead of playing ADC,
he was playing Mage
he
support,
different champions. Yeah, like...
Mage ADC, rather. Yeah.
it was just such a shit show. I fucking hate that split, and I think the balancing team for Riot really fucked up for that split. But yeah, this Fnatic team's a little bit weirder to judge.
And then what happened was, though, by the end of the split, when it became less about that old meta, it got patched out, they did eventually reintroduce Reckless. They just played standard comps. He played AD carries. When they got to the playoffs, like they sometimes would swap Whippo in, but generally they were playing Soaz again, you know, because what they kind of did was the Korean approach, which is you said, right, Whippo, you're going to play when you play the carries. Soaz, you're going to play when you play the tanks. And they kind of did that approach where you have like a legitimate rotation. It's not just a sub scenario if you do badly. It's they play you based on what they want to do. And so they then went, oh, by the way, when they went to MSI, they did okay there, you know. They weren't a particularly, like, elite team or anything. They didn't do anything comparable to
They did better than
2015.
TL.
Sure, they definitely did better than Team Liquid, who fell apart. Then they won this split as well. And quite frankly, again, it was quite dominant. You know, they were very, very good in the final. In fact, I did an episode of Narrative Wake where one of the reasons why Nukeduck actually is hyping this team for Worlds now is because he said when they played scrims against Fnatic while they were on other sides of the bracket before they reached the final, he said if they played 20 scrims, Schalke maybe won 3. So they were very, very strong in Europe. And then obviously now going to Worlds. So, right, let's talk player by player then. So go through these players and give me your thoughts.
So, I mean, I don't want to go just top to bottom. I'll go with the players I know the most.
Okay.
Players I have most experience with. Starting with Reckles. Reckles I've known for a long time. He's an AD that never really had the killer edge. There are some ADs with like this killer edge, like Doublelift, like Imp, who else? To a certain degree, Turtle.
Forgiven.
Yeah, Forgiven, where they want to just strangle you by the throat. They want to just demolish you in lane. They want to like target the other ADC in team fight, and they're very explosive ADs, but they can also have the weakness of just randomly dying at places. Like Uzi, I think Uzi is actually the best example of this. But Reckless is more of this like utility, this very safe, very stable AD. And yeah, I mean, that's what he has been. Like, if you think like really traditional good Reckless champions, you think stuff like Jinx, you think stuff like Israel, you think stuff like Sivir, things that sit in the backline and do a lot of damage in team fights. And that's who Reckless is. Like, it's not really a good thing or a bad thing. That's his style, and that's who he is. And I think he's really embraced that and played that way. So yeah, he's one of the best backline ADCs, Western carry-wise, and that's who he is on this team. Another player that I know really well is Soaz, is an old school player. He's been played from forever ago. Super talented, but kind of lazy at times. I'm sure he fixed a lot of that, and from hearing Fnatic interviews, it does seem that way. He's someone that can play anything, but it seems like he's been more on the tanks this season, especially with how good Caps and Reckles has been playing. Someone used to play tanks or dog champs, as Soaz has been calling it. I honestly don't know that much about the other people, but even for someone that is a primary North America and a Korean League watcher, I hear so much about Caps. I see so much like high-fee replays of Caps on these forums. So yeah, tell us about the other three, or the other four actually, because of Whippo.
Yeah. So okay, I'll give you some take on the other ones you mentioned as well. So for Reckless, like you kind of touched on it there. One of the weird things about Reckless as a player is he's someone where I think I should probably do an article on him someday, because he's someone where unfortunately his career was, I think, really mischaracterized for the early years because everyone was just such a prisoner of the moment. Like, what happened was in the teams where he had Expeke and Soaz, like, you know, season 4 and season 5, etc. Well, not season 5, but season 4, etc. In this period of time, and then obviously later he had Huni and Reno and Febiven. If I'm being honest, I thought those players were like the bigger carry potential, the bigger stars, and Reckless was kind of like the young guy coming in, and his position was like, do your job. Like, if it gets to the end of the game, you're an AD carry, that's where you thrive, you do your damage, but it was never going to be like Uzi out or Forgiven or Double. It's never going to be like play through you, and more, especially as you said, he's never going to demand that, because that's the other thing about those players, is even if the meta doesn't fit them, they're going to say, no, come through me anyway. It's like Huni would, you know, even if it's tanks top lane, Huni's going to say, it doesn't matter, give me a carry and I'll win the game. So Reckless never had that mentality, and I agree, it was a good thing, because the key thing for me, and this is why it's going to sound harsh, is on one level, it means that Reckless needed really good teammates, because as you actually saw in the Fnatic year in like 2016, where they didn't have a whole bunch of sick players, it wasn't that good, if I'm being honest. Like, it was a bit depressing, and he didn't have all the carry threats elsewhere, and which is why he actually tried then to develop his game to become like a primary star, and he actually won the MVP doing that. He was actually a very strong player in attempting to become so, but it didn't necessarily fit his overall style. Like, his kind of temperament for how he wants to play, how he sees the game, is more like be the best clean-up AD carry. Like, it's like, the problem with that is it's never going to be sexy. You're never going to be called the best AD carry in the world if you do that. But it might be the way that you can win in your team if you have the right teammates. So, crucially for me, in this lineup, especially after he had to bench himself because of the meta switch, he got to go back to who he used to be. And since the rest of his team was finally ready to step forwards, like, for example, having Whippo meant that you had this mad versatility if you wanted to in the top lane. Caps finally became like the best player in Europe, whereas before he was a very good rookie, but you had people like Perks there, you had other people. So because finally kind of Reckless was back in a traditional Fnatic setup where the mid and top are very strong, you got to the position where he just became the old Reckless, and that's been good enough. That's been exactly what they've needed. He hasn't had to kind of be like tortured trying to become some weird version of Double Lift or Forgiven, which probably doesn't fit his mentality, if I'm being honest. It's like, it's just not who he is as a player. It's like if you took old school Deft and told him, like, play like Imp, just play forwards all the time, in lane, like, aggressively. That's not who they are. They don't want to do that, They're not going to be comfortable doing that.
Be who you are, like, be the toxic English, like, both GR, and be the
That's what I do, mate.
Korean boy.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to be who you are, like, in and out of game, like, or
Yes.
like you struggle with identity all the time.
And then in terms of Caps, like, yeah, I alluded to it a bit there. Like, one of the interesting things about this team, actually, a little bit of detail people might not know, is that when they first made this lineup a year ago in 2017, and they brought Caps and Broxer in as like rookies to the LCS, the reason they brought him in is because at the time their coach was a guy called Nico the Pico, and he is someone who sadly is very maligned because he was on like the Origin team before and then this team. And I have to say, in terms of LCS coaching, he probably didn't do that great a job. Like, he had a lot of flaws. But he was the guy who apparently saw these two players, not just Caps, who obviously had like some solo queue talent, but he saw Broxer as well, and he was like, right, these are the players we need. And in fact, he even literally did say, like, the vision for the future should be that one day this will be Caps' team. And at the time, that wasn't actually ready. Like, they tried to, in some ways, sort of like force that a bit early on. And so if you're saying now, like, Caps is a bit of a reckless player, like, ignore the pun there, of Reckless being the AD carry. If you're saying now he is, it's in a good way now. Now it's like he is like he has the nickname that they gave him, Baby Faker, right? Which I think it's a very good nickname, actually. He really does play like that style of Faker play where it's like he can play so many champions. He's going to always look to smash the lane, first of all, just in terms of CS. Then he's going to smash the lane going for solo kills. And on top of that, the part that, I mean, this just shows how people can even overrate Faker. Even Faker went too far sometimes. Like, think about all the times you saw him do like a mad flash, like full distance, kill someone under a tower. He didn't always pull that off. Sometimes he fucked that up. We'll watch him in solo queue, But if you can pull that off, you become so dangerous. It adds like another level, because then you get like the intimidation factor where even the other mid, even the other team, now they're even making mistakes or not playing as aggressively because they know that you can go fucking ham, which I always thought was like, Faker was already a very, very, very good player. But you add that on top, and that's what makes you like untouchable. Because at that point in time, it's like the opponent's almost beaten before they've even played you. So I do think that this season, like, Caps became absolutely unbelievable. And I think the hype for him was legit. Then for the other players, as you said, with Soaz, one of the amazing things about Soaz is, because I've known this guy a long, long time, he was, like you said, at one point in time very lazy. Because you have to realize, when you get to like Season 5 and Season 6, that sounds like, because it's so long ago, like the early days of League of Legends. Soaz had already been playing 5 or 6 seasons at that point in time. And remember, because he was on teams that always go to Worlds and go to playoffs, the guy was never getting a break. So he was like, right, most players retire, most players become shit. The way I'm going to offset that is when it's not that important, like, week 2 to 6 of a split, I'm just going to chill. I'm going to practice a bit. I'm going to play the games. If I will lose a game, okay. And the key factor that allowed him to do it, as I referenced in the EULCS episode, is he's a very clutch player in the playoffs. And so he knows once it gets to the playoffs, like, he knows, right, I need maybe like a week or two to ramp up. And then, you're going to start obviously with the easier opponents in the playoffs. I'm going to get up to this level here. And as long as by the finals I'm at my peak form, I can win the split. Now that used to be the way he did it before, but to be fair, more recently he has like fixed a lot of his issues, probably by the way, if we're being honest, because he has competition for his position. Now he has like a young guy who they absolutely could switch to and be very good with. So now he has a reason to compete and to try and be more disciplined, and he's more of a veteran figure in that sense. And as you say, the way they use him in this team, it's funny that the joke is that he says dog champions, because Soaz actually still has the mindset of the old days where he wishes he could play, Ken in every game and Irelia or whatever, but he's not going to get that. And crucially, in his team, in fact, this is one thing at last year's Worlds that really impressed me. I think at last year's World, he was the best Fnatic player, because I remember after they did that bad week 1 in the group where they like went 1-2 or something ridiculous, or might have even lost every game.
0-4. They went 0-4.
When this happened, part of the reason they were able to come back is he would just play like Cho'Gath, but he would like carry the whole game with it though. Like he would just play a flawless game, and yet the key thing was he makes it sound like the champion's bad, but he was able to get a lot out of it. He did a very good job with it, because the mentality when you play those champions is nothing like the carry champions. You have to be able to literally in your brain think just not losing the lane by a lot is a good job. Like just surviving and not getting killed is a good job. A lot of star players can't do that. They want to be getting kills. They want to be the stars. So I give him a lot of props that he was able to sort of give up being a star to let these other guys carry. And in this season, it's been even more so because you've got Caps. Reckless is still in the team. And then in terms of the other guys, right, Broxer, as I alluded to before, basically brought in specifically to play with Caps, to play on the team. Now, he got a lot of criticism last year because in a number of cases in the regular season, his team had winning lanes. And if you are a jungler who has 3 winning lanes, I mean, you saw this with contracts who is in Cloud9, you're going to look good, because how could you not? You got winning lanes all the time. Like, you have to just play your game. But as a result, he wasn't like a dominant jungler. Like, he didn't use that advantage and then go and punish the enemy jungler and take all his camps and like set up be crazy. What he did is he just serviced his lanes. So that was the right thing to do as a rookie. It's the right thing to do as a player who doesn't want to take risks, But this year, I think he developed a little bit more. Like, he had some chances to show he was a better jungler. I still personally don't think he's the best jungler. I think it's very debatable, despite how good the team is.
He's a really good fit for Fnatic.
Yes, exactly. It's like if you've noticed with a lot of these teams, ironically, they don't all have like god junglers, but they have a jungler who works with his lanes. Like they have a player who is the right jungler for his team.
I think that you can say that about even the best teams ever. Like you think SKT, their jungler, and their primary reason why SKT was so good is Faker, but because they had Bengi, who went very well with Faker. And I think that's the ideal jungler, and that's the kind of jungler you want. You think of Team Liquid right now with Xmithie. Like, is Xmithie the best jungler, most hyped jungler ever? Probably not, but he fits really well with that team. Like, all the hyped junglers, like, don't actually really do that well. Like, people like Peanut, who else is like a super hypey jungler? Like,
I mean, traditionally, like Rush or someone like that, you know?
Yeah, Peanut, Rush, Stardog, like these types of junglers, like, honestly, don't do that well.
I think the only one that's the exception to that is probably like Dandy when he was in Samsung, but then that's why Samsung to me is like the most OP team of all time. You had like all the sick players and you had a jungler who was a god, so it's not really surprised to crush the World Championship, right? And then the other player, the last one is Hylissang. Now Hylissang, interestingly enough, when we go back in time, it all ties together. In 2015, when there was that Unicorns of Love team that was doing pretty well in the EU LCS, he's one of the only players in that team who at the time actually did get quite a lot of credit, because crucially, he used to play with an AD carry called Vardags, right? And this guy was not a good AD carry. Like, he was a very mediocre to like low end of the EU LCS AD carry. And in fact, it was only the fact that at the time he didn't always play like carry champions that meant he could be decent at all. But Hylissang, because he was this like strong laning support, it was like him playing Thresh or him playing Morgana, these sorts of champions that basically allowed that AD carry, first of all, to not be a liability, and crucially gave his team chances to play this crazy style, because he's getting like stuns off, he's catching people, and that's giving you a chance to like get the kills and get ahead in the game, because they weren't some like god tier macro team or anything. Well, when he's coming to this team, as you've heard when we've run down the list, this is another team where a lot of the players are very, very good players. These are among the best players in Europe. Well, crucially, what he's added to this team is, because he has that history playing that style, even though they're not like trying to be the most dominant bot lane in all the world, etc., it means that, yes, he can play the Thresh, etc. When they brought in Pyke, he can play something like that, and it adds an extra dimension. And so one thing I think is another key as just a side topic, when you have a very dominant team like this, is one of the reasons people get like inflated value is because they don't have to do as much often because they've got an amazing teammate. But a way that you can add value as like another player in the team who isn't the star is because you've got all these star players, you can either force a ban, which gives your carry another champion he can play, or if they ban one of his, then you get your champion. So if you're somebody who plays, you get Threshold. That's like a sort of a side benefit, which happens when you have a stacked team. And I think Hylissang has added that dimension because Jesus was like much more like playing to the team and playing to like just like a safer support player in that particular sense. So I think in terms of player strength, this might be one we might disagree upon actually, but I guess we'll do the comparison later. But I actually think in terms of player strength, like I have my reservations about Broxer a bit, but like you say, good player for the team. I think all the rest of the players are pretty high up. Like, I will agree on Reckless. I think he reverted a bit, so I can't really... Like, I don't think he's like a double F2Z eye level. But, like, I think Soaz for tanks is very good. I think Caps is really, really good. I think he's actually amazing right now. Reckless is very good for what he does. Hylissang for what he does is good. So I think player strength's pretty good on this team, actually. I'm pretty hyped about them.
I can't really agree on that because I think like the only two standout individual players you can really say are Caps and Soaz. Everyone else is like benefiting from each other by being on this team and like functioning well as a machine.
I would agree to some degree, especially because obviously Records didn't play much in the split and like didn't get the whole... The problem is, it's very hard to take out of your brain past seasons. So, for example, like I said, in 2017, he was winning like the MVP and he didn't have the best team, So I'm still remembering how... So, okay, how about this? He could be a stronger player than he shows. It's just not necessary. Yes. Yeah. Okay. It's just not necessary. Okay, I agree on that kind of, actually. Right, let me think. So let's do the domestic dominance then. What would you say for that?
Ooh, I actually don't have much to say for that because I wasn't too caught up on Europe. What's your idea on them?
Right, that's one where it's a bit tough because it was like this. In the spring, they were a team where, like, for most of the split, they probably were the best. Like, some people hoped because of the history of G2 and them having, like, some good players, like, G2 could compete against them. But realistically, they were, like, overall, they were, like, just ahead enough to be the best team. Summer, obviously, is a shit show again because of the whole meta. Now, the summer was interesting because in the summer, there was, like, 3 teams, and it depended on who you asked. If you asked some people, they thought Misfits was the best because they were actually winning every game initially. If you asked other people, they thought G2 could be the best because when you could play funnel comp, they used to just funnel into Perks, and Perks is a super strong player. So that looked amazing when he would carry the game as a funnel. Like, he would literally have games where he'd get like 10 kills. And so, like, that looked outrageous. But the difference is, Fnatic always had like the roster and the pedigree to like outlast the others. So as the others had their issues or fell off or didn't get deeper in the playoffs, Fnatic just was clearly by the end like the best team. And then I told you that story about Nuke Duck where it's like it's one thing if you dominate in all the official games and in scrims you just dominate everyone. Like at that point in time, it's like that's the complete package. You can't really fuck with that. So yeah, that was pretty impressive. I wouldn't say compared to the teams we were talking. I mean, I guess we'll compare in a minute. But just as a brief over comment, it's not as crazy dominant as that, Like, there's a lot more play to it. There was times in the split where they weren't necessarily number one and where people were contending, certainly, with them. So I would say, like, I'll maybe give them, like, a 7 out of 10 for domestic dominance, Like, good, taking care of your business, winning your splits. Obviously, like we said, MSI wasn't anything nuts. It was just okay. It was better than... the joke is, yeah, it was just better than Team Liquid. That's all that matters, right? MSI, unless you're going to win the thing, just be better than the other main region that's your rival. That's all that really matters. So, okay, then, let's go to the eye test, because this is one where I want to see what you think on this one. What do you think eye test for Fnatic 2018?
Hard. You're
not a fan, are you?
Caps is really good. Caps is really damn good, but that's the only point I can really give. I'm not really sold on Soaz. I'm not really sold on Reckles. Like, Caps is the only player that's like Caps and Broxah, how they play the 2v2 is incredibly good, and overall they team fight well, but they're just better as 5 units versus all these like EU teams. And EU teams this year was kind of weak. Like Misfits, G2, like all the traditional EU teams that are strong that compete against Fnatic. Origin doesn't exist. Like they're just Splice, like it wasn't that great of a split for EU. So I watched finals. Team fighting was pretty decent. Caps was insane, but other than that, like pretty
Yeah, that's something I forgot to say in the domestic part, actually. Like that's if we're contrasting in the past, yeah, it's not as extreme as like in some ways it's not as extreme as 2015 where you have like just bad teams and then really good teams, but it's more like two factors. One, franchising, which reset all the rosters except Fnatic, like I said. That's already, as you saw in NA, that's one of the things that made NA a mess, is like you don't have a basis. You've just got all these new teams, and so even the team themselves isn't together. It's never mind how they play against someone else. Then you add in the summer split, which obviously the meta just made every single region go crazy, and there was not really any like... Put it this way, there wasn't any region except maybe China where like the team that you expected to just won every game. Like that didn't really happen much. So it's hard then. I mean, it's not their fault that was happening this year and it didn't happen in past years, but you have to judge them on what happened. So yeah, I think Europe was a bit of a mess. Like aside from Fnatic, like I told you, G2 and Misfits had their times when they were very strong, but the problem is actually by the end of the split for the playoffs, they had the playoff seeds, but they weren't as strong. Meanwhile, it was people like Vitality and Schalke who were coming on stronger, but then they'd been the teams who hadn't been as sick earlier in the split. So it was a bit of a messy split, and really Fnatic's the only like thread that stays at the top the whole time. So like I said, I give him like some credit for that, but it wasn't like the nuttiest split or anything, which by the way will obviously play into the eye test, because if you're not having to beat the best teams and if you're not having to beat them in like amazing games, it isn't going to look as good, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. And then, I'm definitely with you on the caps one. It was mainly the cap show, if I'm being honest. It was very, very good in that sense. Right, what about this then? So, what was the last one? I always forget the last category. What was it? That was it. It's the eye test.
Yeah. That was it.
Strength for the international teams. Yeah, well, we said it was only MSI at this point in time because no more IEMs, it said. What would you say for MSI, though?
Better, but MSI was so much about Longzhu or Kingzone X Dragons and RNG that Fnatic and TL, like, they weren't really just living up. They weren't
relevant, really, right?
Yeah, they weren't. Yeah, they're side characters, and the two main. Everyone else was just focused on the main characters, and they didn't dent the two main characters enough to really say like, "Oh, Fnatic's legit."
Sure. Right. Well, now we can do this, Loco. So we've laid out the groundwork for all three, and even though sometimes, like to explain the story, we kind of alluded to the others. Let's compare them now. So let's go through the. We'll go category by category.
Let's pick a team that you're gonna stand for. I already picked mine. You already know, and let's have an actual discussion.
Right. Okay.
So mine is 2015, or oh my god, mine is 2016 TSM.
Freudian slip there, viewers. We'll leave that in.
But I don't think you can put up a better argument than 2016 TSM. They had the best players in the roles, like comparatively, like their team strengths. They were so hyped going into Worlds. They're getting credit from Korean teams. Like, I honestly cannot see how you can make an argument against the 2016 TSM team. They're just so hyped and so good in so many ways. And as we talked about in the NA Thorin versus Loco show, like, just a few things went wrong for them, and they could have been a finalist. They could have been at the very least a semi-finalist for sure. So, yeah, I mean, 2016 TSM, come at me, bro.
So here's the thing. I'm going to take a very bold position, Loco. I'm going to take 2018 Fnatic, the current Fnatic. So are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Are you ready? Listen. So first of all, like I said, even in areas where they didn't look as strong, like they're swapping out top laners, Reckless isn't having to be as dominant.
They're so unstable.
The difference is those players didn't need to do those things. Like, you could have just played Soaz the whole year and he could have been a very good player. By the way,
Soaz, lazy. He would have been lazy.
No, Soaz absolutely also can play carries. They just didn't do it because they have Bwipo as well. And actually, Bwipo has a very different mentality as a player. Then look at Reckless. If you made him to, and if you played through him all the time, he absolutely could be a very strong AD carry. I don't think he'd be at his best.
As strong as Double, as strong as Uzi? No. Dude, like, 2018 Fnatic Caps might be the best Western player ever, but how can they be the best Western?
So there's a factor for you right there, Loco. So here's two factors I'm going to give you that mainly why I've picked this team as the best, in my opinion, going into Worlds. Number one factor is the Caps factor, and that's no joke because unfortunately in these past lineups, you look at whoever the best player you want to pick. So Huni from Fnatic 2015 or Bjergsen from, if you're picking Bjergsen, most people probably would, from the TSM squad. The difference is Huni had that clear flaw, which is that if he ever meets, basically, let's be real, just a Korean top laner, so we're going to say the best top laners, that is where he becomes a liability, and because he becomes a liability, your main strength's gone. So I never thought, personally, that team could have won Worlds. I thought they could go deep like they did, but I actually think where they ended up is about the best they could have hoped for. I thought that was like perfect run, pretty much. Then if you look at Bjergsen in 2016, definitely Bjergsen was a very strong player, but at that point in time, Like, I don't think he was the best mid laner, and I don't think you can look at some of the other people in the tournament. Like, I think Crown was a much stronger player.
Like,
Faker was a monster. Yeah, even people like, by the way, some who don't get rated highly, like Kuro. Kuro always does his fucking job, even internationally. Like, that guy's a very legit player, and I had a lot of respect for what he was able to do. And quite frankly, this is a real factor. Bjergsen has never really popped off very much at the big Worlds tournaments. Like, you can say what you like about a team game or what. Difference is, Uzi, Faker, they just pop off every time. It's true. It's a fact. Now, Caps, I think, actually has that. I know there's already a couple of games played, but Caps absolutely will do that. Like, I think the difference between him and Bjergsen is he never went through that period where, like, you lose the trust in your teammates or you have a really hard meta. Sure, he's young in his career, but he's going to play, like, with that, like, young vitality, not the pun, obviously. Yeah, he's going to really go for it like Faker did. And so he has the big carry potential.
So while Caps has that, Reckles lacks so much of that. I think the combination of Bjerg double is way better than combination of Caps Reckless.
Yeah, but that's what ended up biting him in the ass, right? Is like neither ended up carrying it for TSM. Now, I'm not saying, like, again, we're not judging purely on what happened at Worlds, but I mean, like, there was always the potential for that too, because in NA, it was almost like some, like, body movie from the fucking 80s. Like, oh, hey, like, I hate you, but let's just, like, team up and beat these guys, you know. The problem was, they never really had the hierarchy in that team of, like, well, who does get priority and who does, like, get, like, if a game's going badly, who do we feed up and who do we play around, you know? They never had to do that because they were so sick. In this team, it's very clear, Loco. Like, even Reckless, again, to use that phrase from English, like, he knows where his bread's buttered. He knows who the fucking star of this team is, mate. And here's the secondary factor, which I will admit is somewhat tenuous, but I think there's a logic to this. The difference is, like I said about the TSM team, I thought they could be amazing just from player strength and just from smashing the lanes. Now, admittedly, they didn't get the group for Worlds that probably would have suited that best, but okay, they could have done it. The difference in the Fnatic team is, I have never seen a team ever from the West that had this level of versatility. Because think of the players they have. They literally have a real six-man rotation. They can put in a Sob, who isn't just like a Sob. He really changes the game. If you want to play through top lane, you put Bwipo in. If you wanted to play through bot lane, you can sometimes do it through Reckless. They have all these players that are fantastic. They have veterans, they have young players. They have, like, in my opinion, one of the best balances I've ever seen of a team. Like, there's no conflict of a player who is going to, like, overlap with someone else and step on his toes, which sometimes I think happened to the TSM team.
One thing that people really overrate in League of Legends, versatility. It's not about being versatile. It's about being really fucking damn good at one strategy and being able to execute that strategy over and over and over again. Like SKT when they were dominant, Samsung White when they weren't really versatile teams. They were just very fucking good at what they were doing. Like this versatility factor that you're trying to play up for Fnatic isn't gonna matter that much.
Two things. One, that might work for the best SK Telecom lineup. But I remember SK Telecom winning a Worlds 2016 where I don't even think they were the best team. And how they did it was they overcame their liability, which is at the jungle, by making Blank play most of the games, then or Bengi play, and then they would like swap them out. And if they needed to, Bengi would come in. Now Bengi could never have just played all the games. They would have lost outright. Blank couldn't have played all the games. They wouldn't have won the clutch games. So already versatility helped SK Telecom once. Secondly, that is a great philosophy if you are the best Chinese or Korean team. If you're the best Western team and you have one gear, one speed, one style, and they figure you out, good fucking luck. Like that's why NA week 2 at Worlds is like 0-0-0. Like it's because what happens is the Koreans go away, they're breaking them down, they've played them all once already, and then they come back and they go, right, here's the solution. And then they throw the counter at you, and you don't have your reverse. It's like Street Fighter. They've got the counter. You don't know the counter to the counter, and you're like, well, I just lose. The difference is, I think actually, obviously it hasn't happened yet. Some of this is going to be hypothetical, because to be fair, the team I'm arguing for, we don't know if they bomb or if they do well. They actually have some options there, is my point. Like they could, if they found out, for example, that Reckless fucking, like, say he crumbles in a game and he starts crying again or whatever, I don't know, I'm being a bit mean there, but the difference is they could swap up and go, right, we're going to go to play through Bwipo in the top lane now. They could actually do that. That's a possibility. No one else had that in this list.
So if Reckles is doing bad and Bwipo steps in to play carry topside, like people can just exploit Reckles. That makes no sense. Like Fnatic's just, oh man, I think you're giving this Fnatic team way too much credit. Like you think your points are like Caps and them having a 6-man, but like Caps is the only legitimate point you have for this team. Like,
Caps is better now than Bjergsen ever was.
Sure, I can give you that, but the 2016 TSM going into the tournament for Worlds has been, and I think will be, like the standard for all Western teams. Like this 2018 Fnatic team, like they were good, they are good. I don't buy into it. Like, how well do you think they will?
Well, here's the thing. I will say this, right? I actually think they could go even to the final. Like, I think they can beat a lot of teams. But the big problem is this.
Thorin, you're getting old. Oh my god!
Here's the thing. I think history's going to prove me right on this one, mate. But here's the thing.
Oh my god!
I will say it is actually unfair to answer that question though, because unfortunately, unlike past years, like 2015 especially, no one could have won that from the West. It didn't matter how good you are. Like no one was going to beat. Forget SK Telecom. I don't think anyone would have beaten Coup Tigers, KT Rolster. These teams were fucking sick. So the big problem I have with that is, this year, generally, as you've seen from the Chinese teams and Flash Wolves, etc., it's the year where it's the most open anyway. Like, one of the things I think changed this year is, for the first time ever in, like, Royal Never Give Up, you have a team that actually, even in terms of, like, macro play, looks as good as the best Koreans. Well, that never existed before. They were always ahead
the
in
best
one or two
Korean
areas.
team doesn't exist anymore. Like, this year, if a team that wins this year is going to have a tainted victory because FKT isn't there, and FKT didn't exist this year. Like, this year is such a weird year for all Worlds teams because... yeah, like I feel like the competition is a little bit lower than what it.
Sure. Well, no, here's the thing. In a way, because they don't have the best team all the time, but there's also, I have to say, compared to some past years, a lot of the teams that are contenders, I think, are very, very good teams. Like, I think you even have, like, what's crazy is there really are teams like Flash Wolves who aren't a joke. Like, that team actually could go deep, you know. They could have the right opponent and win. But the difference is, with the Fnatic squad, I actually do think, like, okay, I'll go ahead and say it. I do think if they play RNG or KT Rolster, yeah, I'm going to give those teams the win. But I think they could even beat the teams like Afrika Freaks if they play them. If they play against, who was or Gen G, I think they would beat Gen G. I think they've got so many great advantages. Their Gen G's not actually that strong, I think. So I personally think, as long as you avoid RNG until the final, I don't know about KT Rolster because I don't know if there's any choke factor, but I think overall I'd give their team the edge because I think their team is fucking amazing. I think they're basically the third best team in the tournament. So I think that's pretty strong. And then, crucially, like I said, Caps is unreal. Like, that's one thing, actually, just as a quick side tangent. This is a topic that always comes up in debates that people have on, like, Reddit and stuff that really ruins the debate, which is, say you say now, right, Caps is better than Bjergsen. We're not talking about all of his career. Obviously, Bjergsen played so many years and won so many championships. For his career, Bjergsen's better. My point is, if you took 1 year of Bjergsen, if you took Bjergsen at his peak, I think Caps would be better. Now, that doesn't mean he'll be better over his whole career. Maybe he goes to shit next year. But right now, I think Bjergsen was a very, very good player. I do think he was one of the best Westerners ever. But Caps at the moment has, like, it's like Uzi Eye. Everything's lined up where he looks like he could become the best.
All right, Ian. Let's end it on that. I don't have much.
It's bold, right? Going for a bold pick at the end there. Yeah.
All right. I mean, guys, you know Thorin is fucking crazy. Please, like, comment down below what you guys think. If you think, let us know if you think 26.
I am crazy, but you're Loco.
Oh,
there we go. There's the new slogan.